After 4 tumultuous years, America welcomes a new president. What is likely to dominate Mr. Biden's first 100 days in office? And where do China-U.S. relations go from there? And as Brazil authorizes the use of Chinese vaccines for its national vaccination campaign, questions have been asked about its efficacy. What is going on? And as issues arise with other vaccine candidates, how will public concerns about safety be addressed? I'll have an exclusive interview with a representative of the producer of these Chinese vaccines. Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Bixin. Goodbye, President Trump, and hello, President Biden. Following Wednesday's inauguration in Washington, D.C., Joe Biden formally becomes the 46th President of the United States of America. With China-U.S. relations at a historic low, observers have been gauging which direction the White House will take on China. Some expect a civilized relationship to emerge, others warn against wishful thinking. What can both sides expect? Where is room for de-escalation? Joining me for the discussion in Beijing is Professor XIANG, Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and from Washington, D.C. via Skype, ELAND, Senior Fellow at the Independent Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So, Professor Liu, let me go to you first. Policy experts agree that President Biden or Mr. Biden's immediate priorities are all going to be domestic. No quick moves should be expected on China and trade, given the pandemic and political tensions within the United States. What is your assessment of the situation within the first 3 months, let's say?
Hi, Liu Xing. Actually, it's a very good question. Everybody knows that the priorities for Mr. Biden is to fulfill his promise to solve the problems, domestic problems. But we know that actually the domestic agendas are interwoven with international agendas. We cannot separate that. Now we see that the trade tariffs on Chinese goods and other foreign goods are a great burden of the U.S. consumers, and the U.S. government's restrictions on the export of technologies are also a burden for the U.S. Semiconductor manufacturers. So for me, I think Mr. Biden has to look at these international things, not only the domestic burdens. Even for curbing the influence of the COVID-19, he has to seek international cooperations so that the economic recovery could be possible.
An important appointment that's made by Mr. Biden has been the inclusion of former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, dubbed Asia Czar, who was architect of the Pivot to Asia strategy. He was announced for the post of White House coordinator for the Indo-Pacific. Some are calling this nomination Biden's first bold move on Asia. Mr. ELAND, what is your assessment of that nomination and what it would mean for China and bilateral ties?
Well, nominations are important, but of course, that comes from top. And I basically, relations, U.S.-Chinese relations can't go too much further down. So I think it will be better under Biden. They're going to improve, I think. But I don't want to exaggerate that because I think the trade issues are still, an issue for both parties in Congress. And I agree with the first speaker, and that is that it would be better for our economic recovery, our post-pandemic economic recovery, if we also opened the trade between China and the U.S. that has been temporarily closed by the Trump administration, who is very protectionist. And I think you'll see some protectionism from Biden, but I think basically at heart, he may have to respond to some elements of the Democratic Party, but I think he's much more a free trader than Mr. Trump was.
Some of these are will take longer period of time to adjust and reverse. For instance, Mr. Biden has said that he's not going to lift the tariffs immediately, and yet some other things, some other areas may be worth taking a look from early on. Under the Trump administration, U.S.-China relations literally witnessed zero diplomatic activity in the last few months of his presidency. Mr. Liu, we know that diplomats, for instance, from the two sides were not meeting each other since the very unfruitful meeting between Pompeo and State Councilor Yang Jiechi in Hawaii in 2020. So what's going to happen to these kind of contacts between the two sides, especially between diplomats between the two sides? Do you expect them to resume anytime soon?
First of all, we need to know that in the past 5 or 6 months, the China-U.S. relations was in the lowest point since the normalization of the bilateral relation. And the atmosphere in the United States is very seriously poisoned, and the China-U.S. relation is a very controversial topic in the United States. So this is why Mr. Biden was reluctant to talk much about this bilateral relation. But after his inauguration, I think this issue could be on one of his top agendas. So with his cabinet officials and some mid-level officials in dealing with China are installed, I think the dialogue will be start very soon, maybe in 10 or in 10 days or in a month. People like Kurt Campbell has had experience with China, and they will start contact with his Chinese counterparts very, very soon.
Is there awareness, Mr. ELAND, of the need on both sides, at least from your understanding on the side of the United States, to de-escalate the tension in terms of the military and security issues? Do you foresee any steps to be taken in this regard anytime soon?
Well, I think Biden is sort of a pragmatist in foreign policy. His record is that, and Trump was not only a protectionist in the extreme, but also he wanted a whipping boy, if you'll use that. We use that term here in the United States. That is an excuse to, beat on foreign countries for the U.S.'s problems. And I think Mr. Biden, won't do that. I think he will of necessity have to concentrate on domestic issues. Number one, the pandemic. Number two, the economy, which is related to the pandemic. But I think he may be able to do more than one thing at a time. And I think he will, China has to be a top priority for him. And I think that's also related to the economic issue. As was mentioned, we still have protectionist pressures from both parties. So I think that's going to be a little tricky. But I think in other areas, there may be some retraction of the Trump policy. For instance, maybe, and I have no inside knowledge about this, what their policy will be, but Trump made the U.S. policy in the South China Sea more aggressive. And I'm wondering if that will be, an area where he might be able to go back to our original policy there.
Mr. Liu, what is your take on that possibility? Some have indeed predicted that although for the short time being, it is unlikely for Biden to reverse the great majority of Trump's policy or new positions on China, the so-called Pompeoism on the U.S.'s new position on South China Sea could be one of the things that he will reverse. What is your prediction?
Yeah, the Trump administration took extremely confrontational posture to China, especially represented by the Secretary Pompeo. And now I think it's not in the interest of the United States to confront China in any way. we saw that just a few days ago, the U.S. Administration abruptly canceled its planned visit of the ambassador to U.S. ambassador to the UN to cancel her visit to Taiwan. So this means the U.S. administration, even under Mr. Trump, was aware that a confrontation in either the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea were extremely dangerous to and harmful to the U.S. interest. And now we see that Mr. Biden has had almost 50 years of experience in Washington. He knows what is at stake.
Mr. ELAND, how would you describe the kind of obstacles that the Trump administration, including Pompeo, has set for Mr. Biden, such as on issues of South China Sea and more recently on Taiwan? Do you foresee the obstacle being very, very big? For instance, some people are saying if these are laws and there are numerous laws or executive orders, it's going to take a lot of political capital for Mr. Biden if he wants to reverse these last-minute decisions.
Well, I think certainly Trump, he's a very vindictive person, and I think he's actively trying to sabotage any Biden policy towards, staying with the Trump bluster and that sort of thing, and also not just bluster, but facts on the ground. But I think, Biden is a pragmatist. He's still, I think, probably more of an interventionist overall, but as far as than Trump was. But in the case of China, I think, Trump, he just developed this, need to have China as somebody to blame, even during his campaign in 2016, and went right on through for the 4 years he was in office. So I think China took a pretty, was the target of a lot of his bluster, and also he was very erratic. And I think what you're going to get with Biden, you may not like all the decisions that he makes with regard to U.S.-China relations, but I think he will be pragmatic. And I also think the policy will be much more stable. It couldn't get any less stable than when Trump was president.